Good afternoon, this is Daniel here with Cop Watch TV. I want to welcome everyone into our live show where we are going to break down some of the most interesting and important police cases from around the country that have recently happened. If you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to our channel and make sure that you share it with friends and family. We do this live show on Fridays, usually around lunchtime, around noon or so on Fridays, Mountain Time, and just want to make sure that as many people as possible can be into the live show, just so we can have some back and forth and discussion about these really interesting police cases. One of the other things that we do on this channel is, as you know, we post really incredible raw body cam video. We posted one a couple days ago out of Dallas Police Department. It's incredible, really interesting and funny body camera video about Dallas police officers interacting with an individual who is not only is he a fake cop, but he's also, there's some stolen valor in there too. It's really interesting, getting a lot of views. So definitely go ahead and watch that body camera video. And if you haven't already, you can go ahead and follow me over at Police Law News pretty much everywhere. All right, so again, I want to welcome everyone back in, and we're going to talk about 3 officer-involved shooting cases. And, you know, a lot of times the cases that we cover are controversial cases. What I mean by that is, you know, there's some question as to whether or not that these officer-involved shootings are within policy or within the law. And, you know, those are interesting cases that a lot of people like, and a lot of times those become national news. So typically there are cases where if you follow police-type news, this is the kind of case that, you know, everybody might know about. So that's one of the reasons why we cover it. But however, today, the cases that we're going to cover, that all 3 are justified officer-involved shootings. That's my opinion about these cases. And to me, it's not close. And looking at some of the media reports on these cases, there really isn't a whole lot of pushback on these cases, except for the first one that we're going to talk about. And even then, people aren't really criticizing the officer who pulled the trigger. They're more criticizing a backup officer who maybe didn't do what they should have done. So we're going to go ahead and talk about all of these cases. Want to welcome everybody back in. Really curious to see where you're from. Boom News, good to see you back. Let's see, Oscar, good to see you as well. So again, so this first case we're going to talk about happened in Morris, Illinois on September 28th, 2023. And again, this is a case where, you know, it would be, even though I follow this stuff, we have this body camera channel, it would be impossible for me and for the staff here over at Cop Watch TV to know about every single officer involved shooting that happens all over the country. That really wouldn't be something that we are able to talk about every single one or know about every single one. However, this one happened in Morris, Illinois, which is somewhere 45 minutes to an hour outside of Chicago. As a lot of you know, I grew up in the Chicagoland area, but now I live in the Southwest, have for just about the last 2 decades. However, my sister still lives in Chicago. She's a nurse out there, about to be a nurse practitioner. So the only reason I found out about this case is because she sent me a message. She sent me a message earlier this week asking me what my thoughts were about this case. So we're going to go ahead and talk about it. So again, this happened. Hey, Cajun Randy, good to see you back. This happened on September 28th, 2023, over in Morris, Illinois. Again, that's about 45 minutes to an hour outside of Chicago, with an individual named Olivia Schwab, who's a 40-year-old female. Now, a little bit about Miss Schwab. So she suffered from bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. She was actually living in a residential treatment facility where she basically had round-the-clock care with mental health professionals. She was recently released from that. When she was released from that, she went to try to get her life back together. She was living in an apartment. While she was living in this apartment, she hadn't been released from this treatment facility for all that long. She called her mental health counselors and she told them, and essentially she was threatening suicide by knife. It was at that point that the mental health counselors went ahead and called for police officers who responded to the scene. Now, I know that there's some controversy over this, and I think it's important to talk about, hey, when someone is in a legitimate mental health crisis, are police officers the best tool? Are police officers really the ones who we should be sending to calls for service like this? And that's an interesting conversation. There are different models around the country, which we've talked about, but what I think is important for everyone to know, that police officers, when you show up to work and you're putting on your uniform, you go to whatever calls that the dispatcher tells you to go to. So the idea of the conversation of, well, police officers shouldn't go to these kinds of calls, that is not the fault of cops in uniform who are just showing up to work. That is the fault of, and really the responsibility of, the politicians who run the police department. Just Sweet says, no, police are not educated in mental health issues. Just Sweet, okay, police officers may not be educated, as much as we would like in mental health issues, but what happens if someone is in a mental health crisis and they're armed with a weapon, a knife or a gun? That you really can't put unarmed mental health counselors in a situation like that because it's not safe. So what Steve Ladner says, hey, Steve, good to see you back here. So one of the things that, so again, it's not up to the police officers who are just showing up to work, but it's also, really it's the politicians who run and manage the police department are the ones who determine who goes to what call. So police officers are sent to this call. Now, because there was a threat of a knife being there, and that she was threatening to harm herself with a knife, the idea that you're going to send unarmed mental health counselors as the first responders doesn't make in the country where that would be a thing. In everywhere, you would at least call police officers. They had a conversation before they made contact with Ms. Schwab, which is one of the things that we like to see. This is one of the things that we want to see is police officers having a conversation and really talking about what they're going to do before the emergency. What that means is that they're going to have multiple different options available, which is what we want police officers to do. The male officer said, I'm going to have lethal, which means he's going to be armed with a handgun, and he's asking the female police officer to essentially be armed with a taser. And that's how they were going to approach it. And that's exactly what we want police officers to do in a situation like this. So officers get on scene. The male officer is armed with his handgun. However, the female police officer, for whatever reason, she does not take out her taser. She still has the taser holstered. As they get on scene, they're walking through the parking lot, and even before they get to the apartment door, Ms. Schwab is standing outside the door. She's still on the phone with her mental health counselor, but she has a 9-inch knife in her hand. It's at that point that the male police officer, starts giving her commands. He tells her to stop. He tells her to drop the knife over and over and over again. And instead of listening to the police officer and dropping the knife, which again would have essentially avoided all violence, which is the goal in these cases, because we all want these cases to end with less violence. We don't want police officers to get hurt. We don't want citizens to get hurt. We don't want anybody to be harmed. And so her dropping the knife, that would have made this so there would be essentially no violence between the police officers and Ms. Schwab. However, that didn't happen. Ms. Schwab kept the knife. Not only did she not listen to the police officer about dropping the knife, but she advanced towards the police officer. She starts walking towards the police officer. Now, the police officer doesn't just stand his ground and stand there and start barking commands. He's pleading with her to drop the knife, and he's walking backwards. So again, that's dangerous in and of itself, because if you're walking backwards, you can't necessarily see what's behind you. You could trip over anything that happens to be behind you, and if someone is bearing down on you with a knife, that's an incredibly dangerous thing to do, but he does it. So the police officer is walking backwards quickly. Ms. Schwab is advancing towards the police officer with the knife. During this, the officer who is armed with a handgun, which is appropriate for a deadly threat, which is a knife, he tells the female officer, tase her, tase her, tase her. So the officer who's armed with lethal force, he's telling the other police officer to use a taser. Now, he can't force her to use a taser. This isn't AI. There's no remote control where that one police officer can force the actions of another police officer, but he's telling her to operate the taser, to tase Ms. Schwab, and to hopefully end it right there. However, the female officer, then she kind of starts to listen to the male officer. What I mean by that is she unholsters the taser. So here's the thing. She should have had the taser out in the first place. She should have been completely armed with that taser in the first place. So she arms herself with the taser. She turns it on, and you could see that she's kind of bumbling with the taser. So it seems like she's probably going to tase Ms. Schwab, which would have been the best outcome, obviously, right? Tase Ms. Schwab. She drops the knife. They get her in handcuffs. No one's seriously hurt. That's what we all want with this. However, before the officer can manipulate the functions on the taser and to actually use it, before that happens, Ms. Schwab gets between 8 to 10 feet away from the police officer, and she starts to run towards him. Now, you have a 9-inch knife, and you're 8 to 10 feet away from the officer. In my opinion, the officer let her get to close. But the officer let her get too close. However, if anything, that just shows that the officer was going out of his way to not have to use that. The officer lets her get within 8 to 10 feet. At 8 to 10 feet, she goes from a quick walk to a run. It's at that point that the police officer shoots. I'm going to take a little break here and comment on a comment here, take a little deviation here, because Kuros 234 said the 21-foot rule, and yes, thank you so much for mentioning it. That is exactly correct. Now, what I mean by that is exactly correct is that is training that police officers have. It's called the Tueller drill, Tueller. It's called the Tueller drill. When I was in the police academy back in 2005, we did the Tueller drill, and it's something that I'm not sure if it's still done by police departments, but it's a reasonable thing. And let me explain a little bit about what this is. It's Kuros 234. You're 100%. It's when it's holstered. So basically, here's what the drill is. You have a police officer who has the gun holstered. Now, in this case, the gun was not holstered. The officer did have his handgun out. However, she was not 21 feet away, okay? So it's if a police officer has their gun holstered, if someone is standing 21 feet away or closer, and if they're armed with a knife, and if that person starts running towards the police officer, that person is able to, in almost every single situation, able to stab the police officer before the officer can draw out and fire a single shot. That's the 21-foot rule. So when you hear the 21-foot rule, that's what it's based on. Now, it's not an exact science, but as a police officer, especially if you're dealing with people who are armed with knives, it's something to know, like, hey, okay, this guy is armed with a knife. He's about 15 feet away from me. You know what? That might be too close. So again, it's not a hard and fast rule. It's not exact science, but it's a good drill to do. It's reasonable. You can even do it with your kids, pretend like you're drawing out, have them stand with like a stick or something, put them 21 feet away, have them run towards you and see if you can draw out. Now, in the moment, you may not realize that someone is running towards you. And in this drill, you would know that they're running towards you. And even then, it's really difficult to fire one shot before you are stabbed. And a lot of times, bulletproof vests, they're bulletproof. They're not knife-proof. So knives are extremely deadly for everyone, including police officers. So this is a case where this is a case where the police officer fired. He waited literally until the last second. In my opinion, he let her get too close. Also, he wanted the officer to tase and he didn't. The female police officer did not utilize the taser. If you watch the body camera video, what it seems like to me is that she just wasn't prepared. So Morris, Illinois is a small town, and maybe she'd never been in a situation like this. I don't know. I just know that when you go into a situation like this, when one police officer, you have a conversation and you agree to be less lethal force option, that means have that force option out and ready to go. That's what I would have preferred. So boom news. Yeah. So he fired 3 shots. Miss Schwab did end up she was deceased after that officer-involved shooting. But, the police officer was in a point. Again, she has a 9-inch knife, and she's bearing down on him running from 8 to 10 feet away. I mean, there was nothing he could do. Even in the lawsuit that was filed, the most of the criticism in the lawsuit, and again, attorneys aren't honest, right? But even in the lawsuit, most of the criticism was to the female officer, saying that she should have tased the individual. Now, which is strange because, again, in the last couple weeks, we've covered, I think, 3 different cases where police officers were charged with crimes after tasing someone. So again, now we have this is why it's always talk about dishonest criticism. It's like if a police officer tases someone early in an incident, which I think is always the better thing to do so things don't have involved in an officer-involved shooting, but if a police officer tases someone early in an incident, attorneys are going to sue police officers and say that it wasn't necessary, it was excessive force. But now we have a case where an officer doesn't tase someone, and now they're saying, well, how come you didn't tase the person earlier? So again, it's really dishonest criticism. I talk about that kind of stuff all the time, but this is objectively a situation where the female officer should have utilized the taser. It seemed like the male officer wanted to, the attorney wanted her to, and also the female officer was trying to get the taser out. She just didn't do it quick enough because she wasn't ready to go. When I talked about this case on some of my social media channels earlier this week, people said, well, this is not like serious people, even though defense attorneys or plaintiffs' attorneys who are representing people who are shot by police officers, they're not, they know what they're talking about. They're just dishonest. They have to lie because they're representing the best interest of their client. They're not trying to get at the actual truth. And I think we all know that's the case. But, we're just talking to random people who obviously have no police education or experience. They're saying, well, why didn't the police officer shoot her in the leg or in the foot? Well, that's absolutely ridiculous. It's almost laughable. It's one of those things when I'm going back and forth with someone on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or something like that, and someone says the officer should have shot them in the foot, I almost stop the conversation right there, because that's the point where I know this isn't a serious person, or this is just a shockingly uneducated person. The reason why police officers can't shoot, they're watching too many movies, if that's what you think, okay? Too many old Western movies where the police officer shoots someone in the pinky toe, as they're drawn. Like, that isn't reality. The reason we're shooting a gun out of someone's hand, that's absolutely ridiculous. So the reason why you can't do that I think that's only happened like one time where a police officer shot a gun out of someone's hand. It wasn't intentional, right? So the reason, hey, Officer Blue Gun, how are you? Good to see you. So the reason why police officers can't shoot at someone's leg is because it's a small target, okay? First of all, a handgun is lethal force. Police officers should not utilize a lethal weapon system, a deadly force weapon system, for non-lethal force, okay? That isn't what police officers should be doing. Where I'm going with this is that if you're saying the police officer, any situation where you say, hey, an officer should have just shot the person in the leg, you should basically say the officer should have utilized a taser, should have used a beanbag shotgun, should have used a 40 mil round. So again, the idea that police officers are going to use deadly force to shoot someone in the pinky toe, it's not reality. Trying to hit a small moving target under stress and lethal situation, a taser will do. Then the police officer should utilize a taser or a beanbag shotgun. However, if someone is bearing down on you with a knife and they're 8 to 10 feet away with a 9-inch knife, that's a deadly force situation, and police officers should utilize deadly force. This is 100% legal and within the law. There's no question that the attorney said the officer was not in any danger because the knife was pointed downward in a non-threatening manner. Listen, when you have a 9-inch knife and you're running towards someone, no matter how you are holding it, that's going to be a threatening manner. Saying it's non-threatening is a silly level of dishonesty. So really curious about your comments on that one. Let's see. Steve says people with common sense will create distance. The officer did that. The officer was walking backwards as she was walking towards him, and then she started to run towards the police officer. So yeah, police officer in this case did have common sense. The only thing the officers could have done is refuse to go. They say, hey, there's a call. A woman, she's in a mental health crisis. She's armed with a knife. Yeah, I'm going to refuse to go to that call. Sorry. That would be the only option the police officer had. But officers were sent to that call, and they had a good plan. In my opinion, the female officer was not ready to go with her part of the plan. She should have utilized a taser and hopefully successfully tased Miss Schwab. That would have involved all injury and certainly would have hopefully caused Miss Schwab to not die, because typically tasers don't kill people. Officer Blue Gun says a SWAT sniper shot a gun out of a suicidal guy's hand sitting in the middle of an intersection. Yeah, absolutely, and that's a pretty rare thing to do, Officer Blue Gun, as you know. A SWAT sniper being able to sit there, that's possible. A normal cop, as you know, that isn't a reasonable thing to do. All right, so the next case that we're going to talk about is Darvett Brown. So this case, if any of the cases were controversial, meaning that some people might think that, why were the police officers doing that? That was the first one. Again, the majority of the criticism is towards the female cop, not the cop who fired the gun. I think everyone realized that was the reasonable and the right thing for the officer to do. It was the female officer not utilizing the taser. However, these next two cases, there really isn't any question about what the officer should have done. However, if there's some discussion or debate, I'd really be curious to see what it is. So this one happened in San Bernardino, California, on December 10th. So it just happened last week, involving an individual, a 35-year-old named Darvette Brown. So what happened here is Darvette Brown is a 35-year-old female. She went to an apartment complex, and she essentially forced her way into an apartment that was owned by a family friend. Now, the family friend is a grandmother. Who was home at the house was the grandmother and her 3-year-old grandson. That's who was home at the house. Darvette Brown, who was a family friend, like kind of like an acquaintance of these people. She forced her way into the house armed with a gun. Once she was in the gun, she started shooting rounds. In the apartment, and then she essentially took the little boy hostage. Police officers were called to the scene. As police officers got there pretty quick, as police officers with the San Bernardino Police Department got there, there was a balcony to this apartment. They saw Miss Brown was actually on the balcony, and as she was on the balcony, hang on, Bald Handyman says, blocked me so I couldn't comment, came back on a different account. Yeah, hey, Bald Handyman, as long as you act like a reasonable person, you're not going to get blocked. But if you say anything, racist, sexist, or if you do a bunch of spam, you're going to get blocked. But if you act like or if you attacked other people in the chat, if you can act like a decent human, YouTube has guidelines. So also YouTube sometimes ban people. So Bald Handyman, if you act like a decent, normal human with a different opinion, we're going to have a conversation. I don't agree with Steve and some other people on a lot of these cases, but that's okay. We can have a conversation like an adult. So here's the thing, Bald Handyman. Don't say anything in this chat that you wouldn't say in real life, because we know that isn't going to be a whole lot. So in this case, the police, we love Steve, and we love people who have difference of opinions, which is why we invite everyone here, which is why we have the chat on in the first place. So you guys could tell me where I'm wrong, and we can have Boom News, you are always decent. So we can have a nice conversation, a reasonable conversation. Anyway, so police officers got there on scene, and Darvette Brown, she's actually on the balcony. As police officers are walking up to the apartment, she's on the balcony. She actually points the gun at the police officers, and the police officers do not fire at her. They do not shoot, but she does quickly point the gun at police officers. She then retreats back into the apartment. The apartment is locked at this time, so the police officers, knowing that the 3-year-old grandson is in there with someone who had been shooting a gun, they don't waste any time. Police officers kick open the door, which is the right thing to do. As police officers kick open the door, they see that Miss Darvette Brown is standing on a bed, pointing a handgun at the head of a 3-year-old child. Again, police officers don't waste any time, and they shoot Miss Brown multiple times. She falls down. She's still alive. They give her commands to drop the gun, and she refuses. She's still hanging onto the gun, so they shoot her a couple more times until she does drop the gun, and she does end up dying. That was that. She does die from her injuries, and this is one of those cases where the police officers were simply just heroes. I mean, you have to think about it. Here we have a case where someone is firing a gun. They're pointing a gun not only at a 3-year-old but at police officers, and police officers aren't wasting any time. And knowing that a 3-year-old is behind, this is basically like the anti-Uvalde cops, right? So in this case, police officers know that someone is in there with a gun to a 3-year-old, and they kick open the door knowing that they could be shot and take rounds as they enter. They don't care. They enter, and this isn't this isn't a SWAT team. It's not like this is a SWAT team with shields and all kinds of crazy shit like that. It's not. These are just regular street cops who showed up to that call for service, who are just wearing their uniform and their normal bulletproof vest. They did have a normal force array, but they were able to end this situation exactly as it should have, with the 3-year-old child not being injured. No police officers were injured, and the person who was pointing a gun and had posing a deadly threat to the 3-year-old, those individuals that individual was killed by police officers. Again, I tried to find, I did a Google search trying to find the family of Darvette Brown, just to see if there was anything that they said to criticize the police officers. Nothing. Zero. And this is really representative of the vast majority of police shootings happen like this. The controversial ones where it could go one way or another, those are the cases that we typically cover because I like having that conversation. However, this one was exactly what police officers should do, and those cops are heroes. Bald Handyman says, let's see, Bring me into the live stream. Yeah, that's not how we do it. We don't have guests on the show, Bald Handyman. And listen, if we were going to have a guest on the show, it would not be the craziest, most awful person in the chat. I would have Officer Blue Gun. I would have Boom News. I would have Steve Ladner. I really think it'd be interesting to have Steve one day if we ever do this, because I like having the conversation. Again, the reason why I do this show, the reason why we have the chat on is because we like to have conversations. I invite people. I'm telling you right now, if there are people who you think disagree with me, great, invite them in. I would really like to have conversations. I would really like to have them in here. And Bald Handyman, what was your MOS? Why don't you go ahead and put that in there? Boom News says, how scary to kick in the door. Yeah, Boom News, it's one of those things. So I've had to do that a couple times working as a police officer. Like I said, I was on the street for about 15 years. And there's a couple times where I had to kick in a door because there was an emergency going in on the other side. And you don't know what you're going to see. You know, it's one of those things you don't know what you're going to see. And yeah, so this was a scary situation. Thankfully, the police officers were able to save the 3-year-old child. All right, in this last case that we're going to talk about, this happened in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I've talked about Minnesota before. So I went to law school in St. Paul, Minnesota, spent a bunch of time there. So I have an affinity for Minnesota. Even though I grew up in Chicago, did law school in Minnesota, I really like the St. Paul area. Now, I graduated law school back in 2019. So I graduated and finished my law school time in St. Paul, Minnesota, right before all the BLM George Floyd craziness started, because I really didn't have to deal with any of that. I think I've actually only been back to Minnesota. I actually haven't been. I haven't been back to Minnesota since that happened. So I haven't experienced any of that, but I really do like the St. Paul area. So this happened on December 7th. So this just happened recently. And if you get a chance, this body camera footage is absolutely, yeah, exactly, Boom News. Don't you know? Yeah, my wife's family is from South Dakota, and they sound like they should be on an episode of Fargo. It's absolutely crazy. But they don't think that they do, but they absolutely sound like that. It's great. This case happened on December 7th, 2023 in St. Paul, Minnesota, with an individual named Brandon Keys. So again, this is one of those cases where, if you think the police officers did something wrong, like I'm really curious to see what you think the officers should do, because again, that's kind of my thing. We should criticize police officers if they do something wrong, if they violate something and they don't do something correctly. Let's talk about it. But it's too easy to say that, well, if you like police officers, you're a bootlicker, or cops are racist, or ACAB. That really isn't interesting or honest criticism. Here's what I would like to see, because this is how adults talk about these kinds of things, where you say, this is what the police officer did, and say, hey, I think this was wrong. The cop shouldn't have done that. And then point to training, policy, or law to say exactly what policy or law, and say exactly what the police officer should have done. Yeah, so let's go ahead and talk about this case. Oh my goodness. Okay, all right. So we're gonna go ahead and talk about this case. It's Brandon Keys. So basically, this was a case where day shift in St. Paul, and there was a call for service that went out over the radio, and essentially what the call was is that a woman called in and said that she has a restraining order, or an order of protection against her ex-boyfriend, and that he is armed with a gun, and she is currently in her vehicle, and he is ramming his vehicle into her vehicle. That's why she called for police officers. So this is the kind of call, this isn't going to hold. This isn't like a shoplifting that happened, or telephone harassment, or people calling about their neighbors' trash cans. These aren't calls that are going to be sitting and stacking, for hours. When a call like this comes into dispatch, cops are going to get there quick. This is going to be dispatched first, because it's an emergency happening in the moment. There's an order of protection. So we know that a judge has already, we have to believe the woman at her word, right? Otherwise, dispatch typically runs the names, verifies that before the officer gets on scene. But let's assume it's true, because in this case, it was true. So you have someone who has an order of protection. You have someone who has an order of protection. And some departments have like real-time crime centers where they can actually, go through this data in real time as officers are being dispatched, which is a great thing to do for police departments to have that. A lot of progressive and modern police departments have that. So in this case, like I said, an order of protection, that's already should spike something that, hey, there's already an order for this person to not be around this woman, and he's violating that. So the woman's already in danger. The caller's already in danger. He's armed with a gun, which you're not supposed to have, and that's dangerous on its own. And then he's literally ramming his car into her car. That's what the police officer's dispatched to. An officer is sent, officer to Shida. I'm probably not saying that right. TSCH. So there's like 5 consonants the name starts with. TSCHIDA. Officer to Shida. If I'm not saying it correctly, I apologize. But Officer to Shida is dispatched. And this is one of those things, a call like this, you would like more than one police officer to go there. Because again, this is a dangerous scene, not just for the victim, but also for police officers. But fucking Officer to Shida, he doesn't wait for backup. He doesn't say, hey, okay, the call's happening here. Let's go meet 2 blocks down, and then we'll all caravan there together. No, he just goes. He just goes by himself. And listen, when another cop gets there, but there's an emergency, and I'm going right now. That is exactly what we want police officers to do. And this is why there's still a place for the warrior culture in policing. It's because of officers like this who respond quickly to calls like this, don't wait for backup. They just go and they try to save lives in the moment. So Officer Tashida is dispatched. As he gets there, he basically sees the 2 cars. He sees a description of the vehicle, and he immediately sees it in the middle of this intersection in the middle of the day. So he gets out of the car and he starts giving commands to the individual, and really getting out of his car. After like 2 or 3 seconds, he yells, "Oh fuck!" And as soon as he says, "Oh fuck," gunshots start flying, and he's actually shot in the leg. So bad guy Brandon Keys, 24-year-old, shoots the Officer Tashida in the leg. He stays in the fight. Okay, this officer, he doesn't lay down. He doesn't retreat to the back of his car and immediately. As soon as he is shot in the leg, he says, "Oh fuck," because he sees what's going to happen. He essentially can say "oh fuck" before he can respond and return fire. So he is shot 1 time in the leg. The first round hits him in the leg. He immediately exchanges gunfire with Brandon Keys, and he shoots him in the head. And Brandon Keys is down. Now the thing about it is, Brandon Keys, he's down, but he falls behind his car. So there's essentially Brandon Keys is falling on the ground. He's behind his car, and then you have Officer to Shida, who essentially can't see what's happening. So he can't see behind the car. So he's pretty sure he shot Brandon Keys, but he's not 100% sure where he shot him, if he's down, is he reloading, is this going to be an ambush if I try to go in and check on him? So this is a really dangerous situation, as, again, he was shot in the leg. So it was at that point that he gets on the radio, he tells dispatch that there were shots fired, and he lets officers know, or dispatch know, that he was hit, and he requests medics to get on scene. Now, if that isn't chaotic enough, what happens then is the female, and any police officers on here are going to know exactly what I'm talking about. It's this syndrome where, you have someone, you arrest a dude for domestic violence, you give the woman the domestic violence packet, you give her all of the different resources. 3 months later, you're in court, and they're in court next to each other holding hands. It's extremely, yes, adults should be able to do what they want, fine. It's extremely frustrating for police officers, as it would be for anyone who sees the same thing over and over again, especially when you want to make sure that people are safe. What happens next in this case is the female leaves her car, which now is on the other side of the street, and she runs towards him. So Officer Tashida doesn't know, again, if the bad guy is he alive? Is he dead? Is he reloading? Is he just wounded? Is he waiting for the officer to pop his head around the car so he could shoot him? So the officer doesn't know. So as the woman keeps running towards the Brandon Keys, who's on the ground. The officer saying, "Get out of here. Like, I can't render aid or get medics over there until you're out of the scene." Again, she's not helping, not making this any better. Eventually, yeah, she does. The officer eventually, again, I would say that officer safety wise, and again, he was doing it in an effort to try to render aid to save Brandon Keys' life and to keep the victim safe. I get it. But really in a situation like that, wait until there's a couple other officers there, because your life is not worth risking again to go and see if this guy needs help. No. You need to make sure that the situation is safe. So, but Officer Keys selflessly, Officer Tashida selflessly, just like he was selfless on this entire call for service, he does go around there. He does get possession of the gun. He checks on the condition of Mr. Keys. Medics come, and the female, essentially is so distraught. She jumps on the officer's back. Like, she's mad at the officer for, again, this is like a Breonna Taylor situation. It's like you're mad at the officer officer for, not exactly like Breonna Taylor, but it's like you're mad at the officer for returning fire after they were shot in the leg. That's a little silly. Now, I get in the moment, her horrible, disgusting, awful boyfriend has been shot and killed by police officers, so she's not in the right state of mind. I get it, okay? That was the end of that case. And I don't think there's anything different that the officer could have done. I mean, he gets on scene to a high priority, stressful domestic violence situation happening in the middle of an intersection with an armed offender. And as soon as he gets out of his car, literally within 2 seconds of getting out of his car, he's shot by the offender in the leg. The idea that the officer is going to return fire is a completely reasonable thing. There's not really anything else for that police officer to do. It's a justified shooting. Officer Tashida will recover. He will be okay. That's what all the news reports said. Bad guy is dead, and the victim is safe as well. Let's see if there's any other comments about this case. Let's see. Steve Ladner says, do you depend on self-proclaimed heroes for protection? That's a good comment, Steve. I think that's an important thing. So do I depend on self-proclaimed heroes for protection? Well, I'm going to say typically not. And here's why. I'm 41 years old. I've been a cop for, just about 20 years. I have a bunch of guns. My wife is a really good shooter as well. We have 2 giant dogs. So most of the time, I think that I'm pretty safe. I think that I'm capable of protecting myself. Now, just because I'm capable of protecting myself, should I assume that everybody is capable of protecting themselves? No, that would be an unreasonable thing. So my wife is a physical therapist. She works with people who have developmental disabilities. Her 26 or 30 clients that she has, because these are people who have Down syndrome and CP and all kinds of other developmental problems, these are people who literally cannot defend themselves. Yes, so these are the kinds of people who do need protection from police, protection from cops, from the state. Yes, I can imagine a situation where there's an 85-year-old woman who lives alone, like mine 2 next door neighbors. They're 2 individuals. They've been married for about 70 years. It's an older couple in their 90s. Yes. Now, Ernest, who lives next door to me, he's a 94-year-old guy. Okay, he was in the military. Listen, 70 years ago, I wouldn't have fucked with Ernest. Okay, I guarantee you, he could kick everybody's ass in this chat when he was 70 years ago. But he's not. He's 94 years old. So if someone breaks into Ernest's house at 2:00 in the morning, because we kind of live in a violent city, even though in a nice area in a violent city, yes, is Ernest going to call police officers? Should we have police officers so the couple in their 90s are safe? Yes, of course. People with disabilities who can't defend themselves? Yes, of course. A mother or a father with 4 children who don't have any military or police experience? Yes, of course. Those kinds of people should depend on police officers for protection. It's unreasonable. Just because me, as a regular 41-year-old guy who has police training and a lot of weapons and huge dogs, just because I don't need police protection all the time doesn't mean that other people don't. That's my answer to your question, Steve. Let's see. Any other questions on here on this case? No, I don't think we have any. So those are the cases that I wanted to cover. Let's say all 3 cases today, and that isn't always the case of what happens. So I say, Boom News says police usually come after the crime has been committed. Oh, you're 100% Boom News. Yeah, I mean, there's so the city that I live in has about 550,000 people. We have maybe 900 cops. 300 to 400 work on patrol, split across 3 shifts with days off. You can have an area of the town that has 100,000 people and maybe there's 6 cops working. So the idea that police officers are psychics and are going to be, no, that's not real. So you're 100% right. Most of the time, police officers come after a crime was committed. I mean, that's just the reality of the paradigm that we're living in. We do have, most police departments have proactive detective units and and traffic officers who try to do things, to try to prevent crime. That's a great thing to do. But yeah, I mean, most of the time, police officers are answering calls to 911, not just knowing where it is, not knowing where it's going to happen. So that you're 100% correct on that. Most of the time, cops get there after a crime has been committed. Sometime, like in 3 of the cases we talked about today, those officers got there as a crime was still being committed. So like I said, throughout the week, if you want to go ahead and if there are any interesting officer-involved shootings or just other controversial or interesting police cases that I didn't cover that you would like us to cover next week, go ahead and put it in the chat. The chat is something that I essentially check throughout the week, so definitely go ahead and put it in there. And again, if you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to our channel and go ahead and watch that video from a couple days ago. An incredible, really interesting and funny body camera video of a Dallas police officer dealing with someone who was not only a fake cop but also had some stolen valor on his resume and during a dispute with a bunch of different people. It's an incredible video. Go ahead and give that one a watch. Boom News, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And like I said, definitely go ahead and put it in the chat. Go ahead and please subscribe to our channel at Cop Watch TV. And if you want to go ahead and follow me, you can just about anywhere over at Police Law News. I hope that everyone has a great and safe weekend, and we will see you next Friday. Thank you.